My name is Jonah Jonathan, and welcome once again to the Jazz Musician's Voice. Today I'm sharing an interview I did with guitarist Saul Rubin, really one of the great guitarists on the New York jazz scene. He's been in New York basically his whole life, except for music school, and he's a world-famous guitarist, toured all over the world. He's also has his own production company and has produced plenty of recordings and gigs and festivals. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe to this channel. Stay tuned because we have a lot more future interviews coming. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm speaking today with the great jazz guitarist Saul Rubin. I first encountered Saul at various venues around the West Village of New York, such as Smalls Jazz Club and Fat Cat Jazz Club. And he's an incredible guitar player. Saul, for people who are not familiar with your background, can you speak to us about how you initially got started in music? You're from Brooklyn, New York, right?
Yeah, I was born in Manhattan and then raised in Brooklyn, then Long Island. And yeah, I was born in 1958. So in my formative years, the rock, all the great rock bands were playing in the United States, and I was very influenced by Santana, Cream, and especially Jimi Hendrix. Hendrix, and a lot of things. I like Jethro Tull, and I love the British progressive bands. Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Gentle Giant, and bands like that. And then I started listening to fusion. And I started getting into Mahavishnu Orchestra, Return to Forever, and Weather Report, and Jaco Pastorius, and from that was in high school, that's what really brought me to really loving jazz. I had a friend who had Thelonious Monk records and Charlie Parker and Dexter Gordon and Miles. He had all these records, and we used to sit in his house and listen to jazz records. And there was a great jazz radio station called WRVR in New York, and ended up becoming a country station years later. So, that was that was one of the greatest, except for WBGO, it still exists. But in New York, WRVR was the jazz station. And we used to listen, and I really loved Frank Zappa. I loved music that was, I loved rock and I loved blues, heavily influenced by the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and then finding out who their people were, like Howling Wolf and B.B. King, Albert King, Muddy Waters, and Buddy Guy and Junior Wells. So I really felt that through rock I was really indoctrinated into blues, which was really African American music being played by British guys brought to America because for obvious political reasons, the British invasion was more than just a bunch of British guys coming. It was playing music that people didn't want to say was black music. It was white people doing black music.
Contrasting that, the same thing happened for me as a child. My uncle would send me all these blues tapes of like B.B. King, and I went to try to see a B.B. King concert, and that it was sold out. It was somewhere in Manchester, Vermont or something. And I was so bummed. And my parents, they bought me a Jimi Hendrix CD. And that was, the first Jimi Hendrix record, Are You Experienced? And that got me interested in that. And then I kind of made the transition into jazz. I feel like a lot of that, Hendrix was already going in that direction with that music, and
Hendrix was just psychedelic blues, basically.
Yeah. Even personally, when I finally started playing jazz, I ran into a drummer who actually was a jazz drummer with Hendrix, named Randy Kay, who ended up he's since passed away. But yeah, he lived in that mansion, and I think Hendrix was going in that direction. Fusion was there. Rock.
Miles with Hendrix too.
I think the time period that you must have been. As a teenager in the 70s. It's like golden era of music, kind of, so to speak. Good stuff was coming out.
I just remember a friend of mine's older brother had Bitches Brew, and we would listen to Bitches Brew, and it was like that was new to us, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Were you able to, see any shows in New York when you were growing up? Like,
Well, yeah, when I was growing up, I saw mostly rock shows, you know. But some great groups like the Edgar Winter White Trash, that was an incredible band. They used to play at the Academy of Music, which on 14th Street became the Palladium, then became some big dance place. But that place had great concerts, so I saw a lot of concerts there. Madison Square Garden. I loved, one of the great white blues guys is, Edgar Winter, Johnny Winter, incredible blues guitar player. You know, I love Johnny Winter's playing too.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's interesting because a lot of people that, I learned when I used to hang out with the older black gentlemen at the clubs and sit there and keep my mouth shut and listen to what they had to say. They used to talk about the British invasion being like a conspiracy and I didn't really understand it until I got a lot older, and I realized, yes, that it was like Elvis. Elvis was doing black music, and even John Lennon admitted it. He said, "We're just doing black music for white people."
Yeah,
and it's also because of the incredible racism in the United States. Is they didn't want. They never wanted, black music to be too successful, but there are a couple of very strong people like Berry Gordy and the people at Stax and, people who surpassed, who went past it, and were Motown and Stax and,
yes.
It was too good to suppress.
That music in that era, it's a very common thing, studying jazz history. Unfortunately, what would happen is the record labels would just find people who were doing that music as white musicians and market them as if they were the innovators, whereas it was backward. I mean, I was just talking on the phone with Mike Clark, the drummer, because
cool. He's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be doing an interview at some point, and we were talking about, he said he was mentioning, he heard from Harold Mayburn that Mayburn used to know Elvis before he was even anything big or famous, just hanging out on the scene.
He's from Memphis, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's a difficult thing to talk about because, there's a lot of those casts that go with the whole Black American music. I think there should be like credit given where it's due to that music, but there's also so many great white musicians who did contribute to the music. So I don't think you could just call it that. I mean, I don't know. It's a loaded topic,
It is loaded, but I feel like with jazz, if you take the blues out of it, it's just a bunch of stuff. It's just.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like there's a lot of music out today that they call jazz because that's just what they call it. It doesn't swing and it's atonal and it's okay, but it's it could be great music. But people, the problem with it is marketing. Is people always have to put something in a box and say this is this. We're selling this. It's all marketing, and so is it's the people that are successful in jazz are marketed. It's a market. It's business.
Yeah.
And it's very image oriented, and it's but it is the history of the United States encapsulated. And the beautiful thing is, like, as far as the community, is that when you have a community of people, black and white, and we're sharing something that might be a black creation, but we're sharing it now. And it's one of the few places in our country where there is some racism involved, but it's a much more of a community where, if you're respectful of the music, people will respect you more.
Absolutely. I mean, That's certainly something I've seen in jazz, and you personally, you're well respected in the community as a guitarist and a producer, and someone who put on these shows. Delving back into your teens, at what point did you decide you were going to go to the Hartt School of Music, and how did you get into that program?
Oh, Hart College? Well,
Yeah.
okay, well, I was a very rebellious kid. I was a hippie, you know, and I when I took my SAT scores, I didn't read the questions and I filled them all out the answers in 10 minutes and left the room, and I thought I was so cool. I was being really rebellious. Well, I was thinking maybe I'll go to Berkeley. You know, all the guitarists I knew were going to Berkeley, but I got rejected from Berkeley, and I'm glad I did because I got I wanted to go to Eastman, but there was no guitar program, not even classical guitar.
Wow.
So I found out, you know, that there was a guitar teacher at Hartt. He wasn't a great teacher, the jazz guy. He was kind of adjunct faculty. He was really not a great teacher, but I was a composition major. But I told my friend, you know, do you know who Jackie McLean is? You know, when I was 16, because, you know, I was starting to think about colleges, you know, and I see this school as Jackie McLean. And he goes, yeah, Jackie's one of the cats, you know, that's great. You should, you know, and it turned out that even though there wasn't a jazz degree program when I was there, I got a degree in composition, that the master classes that we had were totally the bomb. You know, they were totally, like the first week of school was Woody Shaw. So we're having
That's
master
incredible.
class, Woody Shaw, Dexter Gordon, Jimmy Heath, Irby Green, Sadiq Hakim, all kinds of people. Every week for like a couple of years, Jackie would bring in someone heavy, you know, and it was so I was exposed to, and Jackie himself, Jackie and Paul Jeffrey and Jackie Byard, and also Walter Bishop Jr. was artist in residence for a couple of years. So Jackie Byard used to come up every Wednesday. I think Paul Jeffrey came over. I don't remember exact times, but we had like an ensemble with Jackie Byard. Then we had like a big band masterclass thing with Paul Jeffrey, and Paul Jeffrey. We remained friends. He taught so many people at Rutgers and Hartt. It's just Paul's legacies. So much of it is in his students, because Paul, he as a teacher, I mean, when he was at Rutgers, you know, Terrence Blanchard was there. Frank Lacey, I don't know if he was going to that program, but he was around Rutgers a lot at that time. Terrence, Ralph Peterson, Thomas Chapin, Jerry Weldon, David Schumacher, this guy Harry Pickens. I don't know what happened to him, great piano player at the time. So Rutgers, and Paul had an incredible sax section, and he worked them to the bone. But he really gave me a hard time and taught me a lot of stuff. And he would always encourage me to bring arrangements. Then he'd yell at me in front of the class, and, you know, and Paul was an amazing guy, and he didn't pull punches, but he was a good friend. And actually, when I got the gig with Sonny Rollins, it was because of Paul. After all those years, going to college with Jackie and Paul and Jackie Byard, and then that was always a gig I had my eye on, because I knew that I mean, as much as I love to play straight ahead swing stuff, I know that Sonny was doing some different kind of stuff, more vampy stuff, and I knew that I could really do a great job doing that band. So it was like Peter Bernstein and with Ralph. I mean, it was like Bobby Broom for a long time, and there was another guitar player, I forget his name, but Bobby Broom did it. But then it was a Bernstein, and it was Russell Malone. So basically, it was Russell, then Peter, then me. So I was in very good company guitar-wise.
That's really great.
His last tour, his last gig.
You know, when we talk about jazz education, I got invited in the next year to speak as part of this kind of conference about jazz education and is it worth it in schools and all that. I think you went to school at a time where part of it is just being around those guys and being around the students. I mean, Jackie McLean is legendary. all his recordings. My favorite is Cool Struttin', you know, on Sonny Clark.
Mhm.
It it must have been a good experience just to be able to absorb from those guys the jazz and the lifestyle and that whole thing. That alone is worth it to go to school, you know.
Well, there was another thing about Jackie is that he taught 3 history classes on a regular basis, and one was just jazz history. Actually, it was 4 classes. There was like turn of the century to the 20s, and then from the 20s to the 50s, and the 50s to present. They would all, but then there was one jazz history for musicians for all, because the university, anyone in the university could take Jackie's history classes, but only Hartt students could take the one for musicians. And that one was about stories about growing up in Harlem, him going, and Gil Noble hanging out in Harlem, meeting Bud Powell, hanging out with
Um,
Richie Powell, meeting Richie's brother Bud, and being part of the Harlem thing. And Jackie used to talk about him and Sonny going to Gilly Coggin's house for harmony lessons. It shows him stuff on the piano.
yeah,
And it was a very fertile time in Harlem. Really, bebop is a New York thing. Jazz is not a New York thing. I mean, it
yeah,
is, but it didn't. But New York is where bebop came from,
yeah, yeah. I
But it's
mean,
not where blues came from per se, because blues came up the Mississippi River. But
yes.
to be around Jackie and all those great guest artists. I mean, I didn't know who Woody Shaw was then. I was 17, and I hear this guy at the master class playing the hell out of the drum. I'm like, this is really great. And I went from still being kind of like a fusion kid in high school to just abandoning all rock, and all I did was focus on studying composition and jazz. And then I would get burnt out, and I would listen to tribal music at night, listening to and also listen to Tibetan monk chants, and it was a very diverse kind of like education at that time. It was great.
And that was the Hartford area, right?
Yeah,
Of Connecticut.
yeah, and there were a couple of clubs that were really cool. The 880 Club in South Hartford, and Mad Murphy's, and there were a couple other clubs. But there were some great players in Hartford. And now Jackie's influence. You got guys like Josh Evans
Yep.
from Hartford. You got
Yep.
Des
Yep.
Ron from Hartford, and Brandy, and
I just
I'm
talked
drawing a
with
blank. Hanif.
Wayne Escoffrey too. He was talking about
That's
working with
right. He went,
Jackie and
and Green. What's his name? Jimmy Green went there too, I believe.
yep, yeah,
So but yeah, there's a lot of people who are from the Andrew Renfro, the guitarist from. There's a lot of great people from the Hartford area, and it was a good scene, because it was a place where we could gig. And then I used to play with this guy Paul Brown, and Paul Brown, he was the curator of a weekly jazz concert in Bushnell Park in the summer with the top absolute best concerts in the world, outdoor park summer concerts with a local band, the big names. So we would see Dexter Gordon and Jackie. We'd see Bill Evans played, the whole mess of people. And
yeah.
those concerts, Paul Brown was a great bass player, but he was a Hartford. He was really the part of the. He wasn't. He didn't teach at the school, but he was. He was one of the most important powers of jazz in Hartford, because he really. So we had a band, and I used to play with him a lot. So that was great. He used to play with the Junior Cook Bill Hardman Quintet, and that group that was an incredible group. They played in New York. And Junior was a phenomenal, and Bill Hardman. I mean, yeah, and it was Leroy and Paul Brown on bass. That was one of the best groups in New York at the when I came back to New York.
Yeah. So talk about your return to New York. I mean, you grew up in Brooklyn, so did you move back to Brooklyn, or you moved downtown New York, or?
Well, basically, before I got done with school, I got my girlfriend pregnant, and I ended up getting married. And by the time I moved back to New York, I already had a child. And then 3 years later, we had another kid. So when I got to New York, doing a lot of club dates and doing a lot of teaching, whatever I could to make a living to, support my family. So I didn't really have much of a jazz career as a young man. I wasn't going to, I couldn't really go to jam sessions and hang out. And I was, I became responsible for all these other people, and so I couldn't really pursue a jazz career at that time. So I did a ton of weddings, and I did a ton of corporate work and at hotels and stuff. And I learned a lot of tunes, though. That was a good thing.
Well, I think, I had a similar situation with a son, when you get to a point where you got a family to support, you've got to just make ends meet. But the important thing is that you kept going with the music,
Well, my kids were still really close, so we always have been.
That's great. Yeah.
I didn't go on the road when I was young. I stayed in New York. I did do a little jazz here and there, but it wasn't like not what later, in my 40s, when I started doing more stuff. Yeah, it was better.
What was the music scene like when you did go to clubs in the 80s?
Well, it was kind of a little bit lame in the 80s. I couldn't get into Bradley's because what I mean. Well, that's even before, but I mean, I used to go to Barry's place. Barry Harris's Jazz Cultural Theater was a great breeding ground for a lot of great stuff. Barry's place. Barry's always been like the high point of New York jazz. He's the University of Barry Harris.
Yeah.
The only thing was that I was more of a modernist than he cared for, but he has always been a staunch, he's very conservative, but but I learned a lot from Barry, just, and the people at Barry's, I met good friends that I've known for years, like Clifford Barbaro, I met at Barry's, and Kim, and all kinds of people, and Jimmy Lovelace, Joe Jones Jr., Hal, and William Ash. They were like little kids playing bebop and hanging out, and everyone's talking about, all those guys. And Barry's place was, and all the singers, and it was just a beautiful thing. Barry's place. It was on 8th Avenue and 28th Street, around there.
Well, the 1980s, that was still kind of the period of the loft scene, where a lot of people would get these abandoned lofts in New York and turn them into places to play and perform,
Right. Yeah, I did that later.
Yes, you did that later. But did you get any influence from that, like that kind of concept and that idea coming down the road?
I just wanted to have a studio, and I wanted to have a live-work situation.
Yeah.
I had similar places before that, but yeah, I've had lofts since wow, it's been a while. I was in one building for 10 years, another one in almost 7 years. So I spent a lot of time in lofts and having a recording studio that I lived in,
Yeah, I mean, for over 20 years now, you've had your production company, Zebulon Sound and Light.
Right.
And yeah, like you say, you had a few couple spaces, but man, you've done hundreds of live recordings, concerts, festivals, vocalist series,
right.
Zeb's Place.
Yeah.
Quite a resource and a kind of underrated thing in the jazz community, in the jazz world.
So I did a lot of
elaborate on that. Yeah, how did that, talk more about how that came about?
Well, I think that when early on, when I've always been a visual artist as well, just a little sidetrack. So at a certain point, I had started getting into synthesis and sequencing and learning music in the computer. And then I started making pictures on the computer, and I was like, wow, this is really fun. So I did do computer graphics as a job, 3D animation for 15 years, and then played like club dates on the weekends. And 2001, the work dried up in the animation field, and I just decided I was going to go full-time music and forget about, doing video for a while. And that was good. And I started playing with Victor Jones and a whole bunch of people. And you know, we had a bunch of gigs. And so I was playing full time after 2001, no more animation. But the whole time I'm still an artist. I've still been doing art. And the thing is that I always wanted to learn stuff on my own and just do it on my own. And, you know, it's kind of like really intrigued with virtual reality and jazz and MIDI and, you know, synthesizers. And I play keyboard, you know, so I started, well, I needed a place. And I said, you know, why don't I get a place that I could do some live recording and live, work. And I knew a guy who owned a building, and I was able to get a space. And then I got another space in that building. And then when I got Zeb's place, that was the first other place was on 30th Street. This was on 28th Street, and it was an incredible loft space. It was after actually staying at a friend's house for a while because I was between apartments, and it was a big gamble. And I borrowed some money, and I also was able to like make friends, like friends that were angels, you know, monetary angels that helped me, because the place was big, you know, so I had to pay for it somehow. It wasn't paying for itself, but I think I have good karma, you know, and people, like-minded people that had some money were kicking in, and that's the only way I could do it. It's through relationships.
Yeah.
It's been, my whole career has been about relationships with people, you know. They trust me, I trust them. We do stuff together. That's what playing music is all about with people. You have to trust them. They have to trust you. Otherwise, it's a drag.
Everything is, especially in the jazz community, everything is about relationships and reputation, and about working together as a team, you know.
True. There's a lot of egomaniacs out there, too, who don't work as a team. So, but that's
I mean, if you recall, I think this happens, and you know, I never really discussed this in an interview, but you know, if you recall, sometimes people will come up to a session and they'll play like free jazz or the most out they can for like 30 or 40 choruses with no respect for the rest of the music, you know, just to try to get some attention or piss people off, and you know. And you forget about those people because they're never going to go anywhere, you know.
There are some people who are at a level where they think that they're at such a high level that they could do that, and some of them are, you know, but it's still obnoxious. It's not community thoughtfulness. It's selfishness when someone does that, and nobody wants to hear it, honestly. Yeah. I mean, people, you know, especially when it's a situation or a jam session where everybody wants to play and somebody takes a 40-minute solo, it's like, we don't want to hear that much of you. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
You know, it's actually kind of rude when people do that, but you know, it's okay. The thing about musicians are that they're human beings, and human beings come in all varieties. Some of them are thoughtful and will actually somewhat follow the golden rule, and others don't give a shit what you do. They just stop all over what they need.
Yeah.
So we have to be strong and take care of ourselves and take care of our friends, you know.
Well, that goes back all the way to like some of those kind of jazz folklore legends now, like Bird getting cymbals thrown at him and stuff, you know.
Papa Joe, yeah.
Yeah, and I think definitely though, that is something about the community of jazz, like it's about respect and teamwork and the community, and hopefully sometimes people don't respect that, or they'll talk bad about someone, but boy, it was just you know, one of the videos that I have on my YouTube channel was just like an impromptu thing. I was at Smalls at the right time. I think it was right as the jam session was starting, and it was like Along Came Betty with you on guitar.
Oh,
Mike DeRubo.
Mike DeRubo, yeah, he went to Hartt too.
And Jason Brown on drums. Oh, yeah. Jason Brown and Barack Marty. Yeah, Barack Mori and
it's Barack.
Barack on bass.
Oh yeah, and, another video with the Esperanza. I was on.
Yeah, it was great though. I mean, and your solos really kind of tell a story as opposed to just playing licks. You know, you can kind of
Well, thanks.
building stuff. You know,
I think studying composition helped with that.
yeah, I mean, probably with Jackie too, right?
Yeah, well, studying composition and listening to a lot of great soloists. But you know, when you think like a composer, you're thinking about developing something, not just playing like bars going by. You know what I mean? It's a little different. And also, you know, after a certain level, you know, you listen to like supreme innovative innovators, innovative improvisers. I mean, like Sonny, where like you never know what Sonny's going to play. You know, Sonny's full of surprises all the time. You know, and he's develops his solos. You know, and it's just like such a flow. You know, at Train, you know, and like Train, I think was more, you know, a little less spontaneous than Sonny, but you know, I love them both. And Monk, you know, those are my favorites. You know.
I mean, and the other guy that you work with for quite some time, which you can talk about a little bit if you want, is Roy Hargrove.
Oh yeah, he
unfortunately since passed, you know. But you worked with him in the big band and toured all over with him, you know.
Yeah, and we were good friends too. And he hooked me up. And, you know, I really loved that guy. We had a really interesting, kind of cool relationships. He didn't talk that much, but we talked, you know, and I got to know him, and he was very deep. He was very multi-dimensional, very intelligent, and incredible memory. That's why he knew so much music, you know. He knew so much music, and he was so charismatic. And, you know, he was trying to get me in his band several times. And I have a feeling that his management was the ones who were saying, no, we don't want that, you know, older white guy in the band. Because Roy was saying, I'm trying to get you in my band. And the only thing that would have stopped him would be, you know, the manager, or I won't mention his name. But, but, you know, it's like 3 or 4 times Roy comes up to me in his kind of coy kind of way, goes, yeah, I've been talking about trying to get you in the band. And at that time, it was like Willie Jones III and Gerald Cannon and Sherman Irby and Larry Willis. You know, well, this wouldn't have been at the same time with that band, but around that time, you know, and Roy, you know. But then when Roy started the big band that lasted, he had a big band twice, so I wasn't really in the second big band. But the first big band didn't really last very long. They did some concerts in Washington Square Park, I believe, and it was all-star band. It was like David Newman and all these people. But yeah, we went all over the place. We went to Japan a couple of times, in Europe, and we went to Canada, and we did Monterey, and we did a lot of gigs in New York. We did a Blue Note in New York, and it was I got to write big band arrangements, and that was the thing. Was Roy would say, hey, can you write an arrangement for you know, like Every Time We Say Goodbye was one that I wrote. And then I had like some charts in the book, and, you know, he loved to play them. And then one day I said, he was playing at the Vanguard, he sang Never Let Me Go. So I said, Roy, if I write an arrangement, Never Let Me Go, will you sing it with the big band? And he's like, yeah. So that was one of the last things I did with the big band as far as my charts. But I was so honored to write for that band. And, you know, it was really... you know, I hadn't, although I had been writing in college and stuff a little bit for big band, I didn't have a lot of opportunities to. And when that happened, it was great because, you know, I could hear my arrangements, and he featured me on stuff, and we were good friends.
You know, one of the things about Roy that I always remember, because he would be playing at the Vanguard or something, he would come and hang at these sessions and sit in. I don't think the places wanted him to, but he would do it anyways. He didn't care, you know. He would always have different shoes and like a very unique style, like the hip hop urban style. He had these nice fresh kicks, you know, different colored shoes.
Yeah, he had a lot of shoes with matching hats and matching bow ties and matching jackets. Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, he had his demons, and But I was fortunate enough to speak with him. We did a short interview,
Yeah.
and
Good.
great cat. And he would come into these jam sessions and kind of teach a little knowledge to
Yeah.
people and
He
stuff,
was a
instill
mentor.
stuff.
He was a mentor for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
And he's one of the few guys of that caliber, of that level, high on the food chain of the jazz business, of the industry, that actually would night. When we'd hang out at Smalls, on the old Smalls, till the sun came up. You remember that? He was still
Yeah,
around.
yeah. Well, I mean, someone your age is like a good example of someone who would go and do this hang, but seemed to be very stable and put together. Because I've
Well,
seen
I was
other
a young
guys at that
man.
hang.
I was
I've
young.
seen other guys at that hang that just don't make it because it's just out too late all the time, and it can
It's not
affect
easy.
you.
Yeah. I mean, the last few years I haven't been doing it but not like that. But we had good times every Monday at the Zinc Bar.
Yeah.
We used to go to Arturo's and play with Harry Whitaker. We'd go to the Zinc Bar on Mondays. And then, there was a lot of stuff going on. It was good. New York ended up having a fruitful jazz scene. And strangely enough, the rock scene really sucked. The rock, you never get paid. We had a we all complained, but we didn't know how good it was until COVID-19 hit, and we realized how good things were.
Yeah.
Or at least I did.
Yeah. I think
Everybody loves to complain. That's like a pastime, but we had some really good times, And also, New York was a vortex. You go to the Zinc on Monday night, and there was Tane with Ron Afif and Essiet, and and all these people, Kukoski and Dave Budway, and all these great guitarists, pianists, sax, all instruments. And it was quite a scene, that Zinc Bar, that Monday night scene. Yeah.
For myself as a young musician coming to New York, I was fortunate enough to get my hands on a used car when I just turning 18, and I would come into the sessions and I would be up all night. I'd be at like Cleo's and Smoke, and then I would come downtown. At that time, Sweet Rhythm was still open, and there was a lot of the older cats would be hanging there.
Yeah, we were there every Thursday for like 4 or 5 years or something.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately now we have COVID-19, and we have just a whole different world. And then we have the advent of social media, where I find that there's so many videos flooding the internet of people playing certain things, and it's almost too saturated. But people keep trying to make themselves keep themselves relevant in these times,
Right.
There's in New York, like you just mentioned me, you did some playing outside in the park today. I think that's one way to keep your hands together, because I
did a solo guitar gig outside at a restaurant last night and made some, okay money. It wasn't great, but but it's I've been busking. I never busked in my life. But I'm doing it. I need to keep my chops. I need to keep my
keep the chops up, because this won't last forever, and there will be some musicians that just permanently put down their instrument because they didn't practice at the time that they needed to, and all that.
You can always get some of it back, but you need people that don't. If you need money for food, and there's no gigs, what are you going to do? You're going to get some kind of work.
Yeah.
I mean, there were guys. Ornette Coleman had all kinds of jobs before he was famous, but once he got in, he knew how to. He did very well, But Ornette had I think he was like a elevator operator, custodian. J.J. Johnson was a cab driver, I think.
Same thing with McCoy Tyner. I think he lived close to where Rufus Reid lives, up in New Jersey. And he was a cab driver for a while. And I think that's something that people don't think about with this music. Like, if you really love the music, you're doing it for the art, for the sake of art. and you will continue doing it. If you're in this music just to make money, you might be in the wrong field, you know.
I agree. I mean, you know, and you have to be either a virtuoso or super charismatic to make a lot of money, or you have to have a certain vibe, like a Kamasi Washington or someone like that.
Yeah,
because you know, he's a good artist, but I mean, you can't really put him up against Stanley Turrentine or John Coltrane.
no,
And he's big, he's huge, he does gigantic festivals. Some of the people like Greg Porter,
yeah,
he's phenomenal. I love that cat, and he deserves everything he's getting. Not everybody does,
yeah.
but the business, if they see something they can market in you, they'll market you. And that's been a big problem for me, is because I've never really had any representation, so everything I've done on my own. And although I know I'm respected by the musicians, I've had a really hard time breaking through as a solo, not a solo, but as a band leader. But I'm not complaining, because I had some great gigs in New York with some amazing people like Stacy Diller, you know, like my band.
Yeah.
People that have been playing in my band every week at Fat Cat. It's Stacy Dillard, Greg Glassman. It was Josh Evans, and you know, Frank Lacey and Justin Robinson, a great outdoor player. My God, Justin. You know, Justin was Roy's guy for a long time. So when I have a four horns, that's the horn section. It's Greg Glassman, Stacy Dillard, Frank Lacey, and Justin Robinson. And I play a little piano, but mostly guitar. And then Brandon Lewis on drums. And this great bass player, a young guy from London named Mark Lewandowski. He's in my band now. And the band was great. We had a hit at Smalls in January, you know, and then we played again at Smalls during the, you know, for the live stream. It was July 25th. And it was so great. I don't know if that band will ever play again. Not in that configuration. 7 pieces, who can afford that?
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Well,
I like playing trio and quartet as well.
You're absolutely right about social media and marketing and stuff. I mean, I'm learning so much more about that. You know, I've been doing YouTube for a long time.
Right.
They have changed the algorithms now. Like when I would put something out before, you get a lot more views a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Now they're in favor of like you paying money to promote your stuff if you wanted to get to the top of the page.
Fan pages, especially, they're useless unless you put ad money into it.
Would add money or you put a lot of time in it.
And they're also censoring content. They're censoring content. There are people listening to shit and watching it to see what's okay and what's not. Yeah, we can't even get into a conversation with politics because that'll take all night.
Yeah. Well, you know, I watched that guy. The one I saw recently was the young, talented British guy, Jacob Collier or something. That guy's got like millions of views. And he plays all the instruments or something. I guess they've been really marketing him, you know. You know, thanks so much for speaking with us. Before we finish, talk a little bit about this project that you just came out with, the short 3D animation that you narrated. That was pretty cool, you know.
Okay, cool. Well, you know, I have been working on animation all my life, you know, but just since I stopped doing it as a job, it was more like just of an art interest. But during COVID, when it started, I said, I got to find something to do. I'm going to be home for like at least 3 months by myself. So I decided, I never built a computer before, so I watched a bunch of videos on how to build computers. So I built a computer from scratch, and it's very powerful. And then I installed Linux, which is totally open source and free. And then I'm using this free software called Blender 3D, which is 3D packages in the world. And I did a digital kind of representation of a puppet show that I always wanted to do. And it's called Magic Song. And basically, it's a story about, it comes from the early Commedia dell'arte characters of Italian theater, which were like the Harlequino and the Damsel and the El Capitan and all these prototypical characters of stories, you know, the good guy, the bad guy, and the damsel in distress. All those stories come from that kind of theater. So I did like an urban street version of it with jazz, a twist on it. And I always wanted to do this puppet show, but I never performed it, but I wrote the music. So I said, let me do a 3D version of it. It's 10.5 minutes long. It tells a very sad but very poignant and very American story about you know, racism, sexism, music, business, and you know, like, and people and life. And it's a heavy piece. People that have been seeing it have really enjoyed it, and some said that they really felt it really moved them. And
Yeah, it was great.
I played flute, saxophone, guitar, bass, and keys on it. And I recorded it all on my Mac with Logic, with a little interface. And then I did all the video on this new computer I built. And I finished it like a week and a half ago. It's taken me 6 months.
It's pretty great. I mean, I enjoyed the story. I mean, like the homeless guy who kind of goes and does his stuff, and there's like kind of a hooker type woman, and she ended up going with the money at the end, you know.
Right, exactly.
You know, like
he was a homeless black man playing saxophone, a prostitute, and a white man in a blue suit with a tie and a briefcase. So that's El Capitan, the briefcase guy, and then the hooker is the damsel, and the Harlequino is the homeless saxophone guy. So it's like, you know, these are the characters from the old puppet shows, but just, you know, revamped for modern urban vibe.
Well, I dug it, and you kept yourself busy during this time.
Right. Yeah, it was good. Otherwise, I'd go nuts.
Keep creative, you know, which is great.
And I practiced saxophone and flute every day for 3 months just to be able to do those parts.
Wow. You know, it shows. You know, it sounds good, and you know, hopefully we're gonna see. When this coronavirus is done, maybe we'll see another iteration of Zebs again, right? You know, another space.
Yeah, but except I learned a lot by doing it. And one thing I learned is you get investors first. Instead of like doing it on a wing and a prayer and just praying and hoping that it's going to work out. But it was a great experience that I did. It was 7 years. And I created a community and people are still talking about it to this day, saying how much they miss it. So, and I you know, and I was, you know, I would run the sessions. I wouldn't let people play long solos. I would make sure the singers were, you know, we did a lot of great stuff at Zeb's. Yeah, it was a good experience.
Well, you know, Saul, thanks so much for doing this. People can check you out. saulrubin.com, right?
Well, the best thing to check me out is zebtunes.com. ZEBTUNES. I have a saulrubin.com, which links to Zebtunes as well.
Great.
But, that's, you know, that's basically.
For young students, are you taking private instruction or?
I haven't really been teaching. You know, I'm considering it, but I'm also not considering it because I'm more into production than teaching.
Right. Well, we'll see you shortly, you know, out there in the world again, I'm sure, with when coronavirus is over. You know, you're in New York, keeping on the flame, you know.
Yeah, I'm trying to play as much as possible. Yeah.